Well, joining us with more on this topic is Steve Pruitt. He's managing partner at Watts Partners and former staff director of the U.S. House Budget Committee. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So what would you say are the expectations from both sides going into these talks?
Well, from the U.S., I think it's more of a learning exercise than anything else. I mean, we have our view of how the Chinese have behaved and how they've acted in this situation around trade, but I think there's still a lot to be learned on the part of our officials. The only one in that delegation who's really been involved in these kind of talks is Robert Lighthizer, and I think he will play a strong role, at least in terms of leading what the delegation works its way through. But for the most part, I see this more as a listening session on both sides, quite frankly, because they've been talking past each other and through the media for months now. And we're now running up against some self-imposed deadlines, which folks are going to have to get real serious about.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned the leading voices from the U.S. delegation, because you have obviously the more protectionist, Navarro, Ross Lighthizer, and then the free traders in Mnuchin and Kudlow. So what is the strategy of the U.S. approaching these negotiations, given this sort of division?
Well, being a budget person at heart, I think a lot of this fits right into what President Trump views as a win, and that's going to be numbers. At the end of the day, he's going to be looking at the tariffs and their impact on the overall trade deficit and how that plays out. And if those numbers meet to his satisfaction, I think the details are going to be less of a concern for him. Now, that's going to be a problem. Obviously, you can't bring numbers down without impacting commodities and activities in the U.S. And I think finding the balance in that is going to be very difficult on our side, much easier for the Chinese.
And to that point, then, how do you think the U.S. approach differs from the Chinese approach? How do you think China is going to approach this?
Well, so far, everything that we've seen has been very strategic, very planned, and choreographed very tightly. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury in America right now. Every day is a new day, and we all wake up to find out what the latest tweet is and figure out how we're going to respond accordingly. So I think that's going to be a problem, at least initially with these talks.
Right.
Longer term, and I think we probably are looking summertime as a time frame, they'll find some structure, A, and B, I think that structure is going to be driven not only from the White House into Pennsylvania Avenue, but I think the Congress is ultimately going to have to become more engaged in this, because their constituents, I think, are quickly coming to the realization that the only people who will listen to them are on the upper end of Pennsylvania Avenue, those of us who are from Congress.
Right. Now, it's interesting because dialogue is usually a sign of a de-escalation or a pause in the talks. We're not really sure if that's the same with the Trump administration, given that they're still trying to move ahead with some of their tariffs against China. So what would make the talks then a success from both perspectives?
Well, I'm not sure that you want to label this round of talks when they conclude as successful or not.
Well, some people would say even getting to the table is a success.
I think getting to the table is important. I don't necessarily see it as a de-escalation, and nor do I see it as a pause. I kind of see it as part of the overall chaos that our government has come to embrace in the way we do business. And I think, to the Chinese credit, they have a plan. They are making it very clear that they're sticking to their plan, and that it is the U.S. who's going to have to bend and give.
Now, as China continues to open up its markets to foreign investment and participation, how likely then are we to see the U.S. adjust in terms of how receptive it is about U.S. investment in some of the mergers?
Oh, I think all of that has the potential of being very positive. The question is, will we figure that out in time before we start kicking sand out of the sandbox here? And I think that's many people's greatest concern, particularly in the agriculture and some of the technology areas.
And very quickly, we know that America's trade partners across the world, whether it's China, the EU, the African Union, organizations like the IMF and the WTO, they really want to see multilateralism. How likely then are we to see a middle ground, being that the U.S. is trying to pull away from that?
Somewhere between 0 and none. I think this administration clearly has set a course that is not focused at all upon bilateral or multilateral operations. You know, Make America Great Again really is the guiding theme for this administration in their negotiations. And I think the international players have got to adapt to that, quite frankly, realizing that at the end of the day, it can't get that bad. The U.S. only has so much impact here.
Right.
We're a large player, but we're not the 800-pound gorilla that we used to be. And as a result, our role in the global economy will have to become moderated in some form or fashion.
Well, thank you as always for your insights. Steve Pruitt there of Watts Partners and the former staff director of the Committee on the Budget of the U.S. House of Representatives.